They expected to find graves. What they found was evidence. June 1877, Montana Territory. A burial detail rides up the same hill where 1 year earlier, 268 soldiers died in roughly 2 hours. The field should have been quiet. It wasn't. Bones lay scattered, pulled apart, dragged by animals across ground that still smelled, 12 months later, of iron and rot. Shallow burials a few inches of scraped soil over where men fell had not survived winter, freeze, thaw, rain, coyotes. The hillside returned everything. But the bones weren't the worst discovery. The worst discovery was where they were. Official reports from the previous year placed Custer's immediate command on a single hilltop, a tight perimeter, overwhelmed but organized, a last stand. The physical evidence said the reports were wrong. Remains were scattered down ravines, into coulées, across distances no organized defensive position could explain. Soldiers had died far from where they were supposed to have been fighting. The question isn't why they died. The question is why they died there and what forced them to run. Treat this hillside as what it is, a crime scene. The soldiers are the victims. The archaeologists who would come here are the detectives. And the evidence buried for a century will overturn the official story. If you've ever walked this battlefield, you've seen the white marble markers scattered across the hill. They look authoritative, permanent, like the final word on how men died here. They are not the final word. Many of them are wrong, some dramatically so, and the proof is buried right underneath them in the soil, in the copper, and in the bone. You can't see it, but it's there. To understand why, you don't need tactics. You need physics. The physics of what happens when men are trapped and their weapons fail. Deep coulee is a problem the official story can't explain. It's a natural depression cut into the south side of the battlefield, the wrong direction from any position Custer's men were supposed to be holding. And yet the burial party in 1877 found remains there. Multiple sets. Men didn't retreat to Deep Coulee to fight. They retreated there because everything else had failed. The distinction matters because it tells you when the battle stopped being a battle. At some point, formation collapsed. Orders stopped traveling. Small groups broke away and ran for low ground. We'll come back to what was found in that coulee, because it is the most disturbing evidence on the entire field. The 7th Cavalry carried the Springfield Model 1873 trapdoor carbine. Single shot, breech loading, accurate on paper. On paper, adequate. In the field, under sustained fire and 90-degree heat, a liability you didn't get to choose. The weapon used copper cartridge cases. Copper expands when hot. Fire rapidly, the chamber heats. The casing swells inside the steel chamber. When the extractor claw tries to pull it free, it can tear through the base of the casing instead. The case stays in the chamber. The action jams. The gun becomes dead weight. Now imagine that happening while someone is shooting at you from multiple directions. Your carbine is useless. You have a knife. Your hands are shaking. The metal is hot enough to burn. Forensic archaeologists recovered hundreds of Springfield casings from this battlefield. Many showed the signature of ruptured extraction, the base torn away, the case walls still inside the chamber. These weren't soldiers who ran out of ammunition. These were soldiers whose weapons failed while they were still in the fight. The highest concentrations of ruptured casings appear where the fighting was heaviest, exactly where heat and panic would peak. 2 unfired rounds found in one soldier's cartridge belt weren't saved for last. They were unreachable. His gun failed before he could chamber them. Now flip the perspective, because this only makes sense from the other side. The Lakota and Cheyenne warriors weren't just more numerous. Many were better armed. Winchester and Henry repeating rifles. 15 rounds, lever action, continuous, fire. While a cavalryman struggled to pry a ruptured casing from a single-shot weapon, a repeating rifle could empty a magazine in seconds. Forensic teams later used firing pin analysis to track individual weapons across the battlefield. Each firearm leaves microscopic marks on the primer of a spent casing, like a fingerprint. By matching those marks, investigators tracked where specific weapons fired and where they moved. What emerged wasn't chaos. It was compression. Warriors swept up from the river. They flanked north. They cut off retreat south. They didn't rush the hilltop. They closed every exit first. Cavalry positions contracted over time, not by choice. The soldier casings thin out toward the end of the sequence. Fewer working guns. Fewer men still firing. Forensics indicate Custer's immediate command stopped functioning as a cohesive unit in 20 to 40 minutes. Not hours. Minutes. When the burial party arrived in 1877, the bodies had been altered by more than animals and weather. Mutilation of enemy dead was practiced in the Plains Wars by both sides, and the reports describe it clinically. Missing hands. Skulls separated from spines. Deliberate disfigurement, meant to ensure the dead would not fight again. The practical effect was forensic chaos. Many bodies could not be identified. Burial records use phrases like believed to be and in the vicinity of. Even Custer himself was identified primarily by clothing and recognition. The men beside him were often identified by proximity alone. They were grouped together in death because it was assumed they had stood together in life. That assumption was wrong. When forensic teams excavated the field a century later, they found remains in places that challenged nearly every grouping made in 1877. And they found something else, something that had been waiting in Deep Coulee for over 100 years to be noticed. In 1983, a brush fire swept across part of the battlefield. Historians feared damage. They had it backwards. The fire didn't damage the archaeological record. It exposed it. For the first time since 1876, the ground was stripped bare. The National Park Service moved quickly. Systematic grid searches, metal detectors, evidence flags. The field was treated like a crime scene because it was. What they found invalidated decades of assumption. The white marble markers had been placed based on disturbed remains, incomplete records, and the need to impose order. The markers tell the story the Army needed. The soil tells the story that happened. The markers suggest a tight defensive circle. Men facing outward, dying in formation. The forensic map shows a collapse in motion. Firing positions scattered downslope, into ravines, into low ground, exactly where men go when they are no longer fighting but trying to escape. Accounts from Lakota and Cheyenne warriors described soldiers breaking into small groups and running. For decades, those accounts were treated as exaggeration. The forensics confirmed them. There was no single last stand. There were dozens of final stands, each one smaller than the last. Deep Coulee holds the final evidence. Forensic teams found skeletal remains clustered in low ground, away from any defensible position. Some cranial remains showed contact-range gunshot wounds, near zero distance. Some of those wounds were self-inflicted. The forensic report does not editorialize. It gives the data, so we'll let the data speak. A small group of soldiers, isolated, weapons failing, ammunition gone or unreachable, surrounded, gathered together in a depression in the ground. They could hear the battle ending around them. They knew what capture meant. They made a decision under conditions designed to remove every good option. Not cowardice, not heroism, just the math of an unsurvivable situation closing in. The evidence doesn't judge them. It just records what happened. Among the artifacts recovered was a single infantry button, standard issue, eagle and shield, manufactured in 1874 or 1875. It belonged to a soldier who had been in the Army no more than 2 years. He was 19. No photograph of him exists. His description is in a ledger. His name appears on a muster roll. The button is all that survived with anything specific to say about him. That button is the whole story, reduced to an object. Not tactics, not commanders, not policy or politics. Just a 19-year-old, far from home, on a hill he'd never heard of 6 months earlier, holding a gun that stopped working when he needed it most. The markers tell the story we wanted. The soil tells the story that happened whether we're ready for it or not.